Let's get more analysis, and of course we are now going to talk about this budget. We're joined by the Rural Health Advocacy Director, Russell Rensburg, and of course to get an insight from him about the story from the perspective of your story. Russell, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Colin.
Let's do it this way. We've heard so much analysis. I want us to take this budget to a household.
Yes.
And then this scenario. Let's say South Africa was your house, and this budget was the constraints of your wallet. How would you describe it?
I think it's an interesting question, because I'm a father of 4 kids, so I know very well, more or less, how to balance budgets and trying to figure out how to make sure that I deliver the results that I need. And I think for me, it's about creating an environment where my children can prosper. So the decisions that I make is around making sure that those 4 kids, when they enter the labor market or enter maturity, have enough to be, not money, but essentially enough skills to be able to fend for themselves.
But how are you going to move? You've got so much debt. You've got a budget deficit of 5.8%. Your debt levels are at 4.5 trillion rand. Debt is a function of existence. I think many of us are first generation dudes, so we have to fund our growth with debt. And I still think there's quite a fair amount of room to increase debt. Because if you look at it at the moment, we might create an environment where we're going to contract the economy even further, that our earning potential drops. And as our earning potential drops, our revenue drops. And as our revenue drops, we're able to do less things. So it's a very difficult decision, and I can understand the frustration that those at Madiba Street may have been sitting out when they figured out this budget. But the reality is, we need a story that's going to prepare us for the next cycle. But then, Russell, if I were going to say to you that 2 years ago, you could not collect 50 billion rand, but then 2 years down the line, you could not collect 50.3 billion rand. Why is there not an improvement in terms of improving your finances?
Look, I think economic conditions globally are really tough. If you look at your own personal position, your increases have probably been less than inflation, if you like, the rest of us. Most professional people or even employed people have been enjoying increases around 5 to 6%, whereas the cost of things have gone up by way more than that. So at the one side, obviously that means there's less. In terms of bonuses, there's no longer a thing like a 13th check. That impacts on the revenue. But there are measures that they're looking at improving the performance of the South African Revenue Service, and will probably take another year or so before we see those improving. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I think for me, the big story here is, where does this budget take us? Does it create a platform to bring that 40% of the population who are currently not in employment into employment? And do we have a long-term story? And I think for many of us, we feel that this budget will probably make things worse rather than making things better.
But Russell, on Friday, you could be facing a credit status review by rating agencies. What do you say there?
Look, I think at the end of the day, I think what we know is that the world growth worldwide and yields growth worldwide is not fantastic. And we may not be, ratings downgrade may not be the end of the world. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden nobody will lend us money. There's a strong secondary market for sovereign debt. I think the only thing that happens with ratings agencies is that when you get a junk status downgrade, it normally translates into the big funds not being able to hold your bonds. But it doesn't stop other investors of buying those bonds. So I think there's still a very strong market for it. So it doesn't necessarily mean should we be downgraded to junk status. We will join lots of other emerging economies who are also in junk, but we will still be able to get the debt that we need. What's more important is, how are we going to increase revenue going forward?
And in terms of revenue increase, then how are you going to allocate finances when you are going to adopt a new policy in as far as the NHI is concerned?
Look, I think the NHI is important. If you look at the end of the day, health is an enabler. Health is not just about disease. One of the biggest challenges that we face in our country is unemployment. 7 out of 10 young people are unemployed, right? The 7 out of 10 are unemployed, so only 3 are employed. If you look at the cost, if you had to start a business tomorrow, will you be able to offer medical aid to your employees? No. If you got retrenched from your work in this current economic climate, will you be able to maintain your medical aid insurance premiums? No. I think at the end of the day, by creating a social solidarity fund like the NHI, we create an opportunity that can actually reduce the cost of doing business. That can also start doing things that will ensure that people get the help that they need to fully prosper. If you look at the rural woman, for instance,
one of the major issues in rural areas is teenage pregnancy rates. Part of that teenage pregnancy rates could be an access to healthcare services that's not available because it's underfunded or we don't have obstetricians coming there. Those girls, once they've had that baby, they're actually taken out of the economic market. They don't finish school. They become economically vulnerable. And they're reliant on others to drive forward. When we have a policy like the NHI that makes sure that you get the health where you need it, when you need it, it can actually improve economic prospects over the longer term. So we mustn't always look at social spending as some kind of leakage from our wallets, but rather look at it as an investment in our future. And I think we need to do more things like that. Another thing with the NHI, if we're going to expand health facilities, if we have to fix things, it's going to need us to invest in infrastructure. That kind of infrastructure investments can bring jobs to areas where currently there are no jobs.
Okay, you've taken away the next question that I was going to ask you about the Russell that I'm addressing now in terms of infrastructure spend of 500 billion rand. Mm-hmm. But Russell is experiencing a very serious challenge when it comes to disinvestment.
Yes.
You are having high unemployment, which has just ticked up yesterday. Mm-hmm. And you are having a disinvestment of Anglo. Just this morning we saw an article saying that by 2020 they want to be out of South Africa. So Russell still has a problem.
Look, I think we need new kinds of industries. Mining has been a sunset industry for some time. The yields on mining, South African mines are among some of the deepest in the world, and they're very expensive to mine. And we've seen that industry decline over the last 10, 15 years. So Anglo disinvesting is less about us as a country and more about them trying to optimize their business. But new opportunities come in. One of the things in Tito Mboweni's economic plan is like the release of spectrum so that we can have better broadband. Better broadband services means we can take things out into the countryside, like business process outsourcing, that before we weren't able to do. So we can bring economic opportunities closer to people. But in order to do that, we need to invest in human capital. And I think that's kind of the difficult decisions that we have to figure out. So as one goes, another one will come in.
Russell, you still have many problems.
Yes.
Next year, you want us to give you 3 months to go think out your expenditure plan. When you come back in February next year, what convincing plan in as far as your expenditure that's going to speak into how economic activity is going to play out for the 4 quarters of the year is going to convince that your economy will come out of the quagmire?
Look, I think that's going to be a very difficult question because in South Africa it's not just a technical issue, it's also a political issue. Right? And I think we need to have a meeting of the minds and try and understand and go back to that national development plan and see which aspects of it are the ones that we can actually achieve over the next term. And then start serious conversations about the trade-offs that we need to make. But the reality is that over the last 10 years, we've had a significant erosion in state capacity. We need to be honest about that and figure out, are we really capable of delivering the kind of things that we need to do as a government? That's the first priority. And I think when it comes to health, we talk about 3 different things. Let's understand our human resources for health. Do we have the resources that we need? The same applies to the rest of government. It goes to information. Do we have the right kind of information at the right time? Do we allow us to make the right kind of decisions? And the last thing is our financing mix okay? Is our current debt levels okay? Are there different ways that we can reimagine the spot and start looking at a conversation that takes South Africa forward? But the most important issue for me and for others like me who have children and stuff is that we feel that the state's full responsibility should be full employment. So all of our policies must coalesce around this notion of bringing as many people into the labor market as we possibly can.
All right. Russell, then you're parting short. How do you rate yourself in terms of the budget that you have given us in terms of how you have personalized it from the perspective of the South African economy now?
Look, if my review on the budget that was presented by Tito today, I feel that this is it's a budget that doesn't really speak to our reality. We talk about achieving 150 billion rand over 3 years in savings in an environment where we've never been able to save anything. We reduce expenditure ceilings and then wasteful and irregular expenditure go up. So I think there's a whole issue for me around, without significant investments and analysis around what is our capacity as a state to deliver the services that we need to do, any proposals or anything that we put forward will be difficult to fathom as realistic or not.
Surely today you've really had a very tough day at the office for having to juxtapose a personal budget and a national budget. But thank you very much for giving us that your story perspective in analyzing this budget.
Thank you for the opportunity, Colin.
All right. Thank you very much to Rural Health Advocacy Director Russell Rensburg, telling us about his personal wallet in terms of the South African economy and the budget that was presented today. And that's it from me.